Okay, well, thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate it. My name is Wendy Patfong, and this is a webinar on building internal relationship with a remote workforce. I am joined today by our lovely Amy Garzito. I'll let her do a quick introduction.
Hey, my name is Amy Garzito. I'm a conflict coach. I help organizations build conflict resilience. And the idea is to have everyone build the skills and responsibility to manage their own internal and external conflicts so that you don't have to do it. Thank you.
Awesome. And my name is Wendy Patfong. I'm currently the Chief of Staff at 7Geese. I have been working a lot in HR as well in terms of professional services, helping our customers with enrolling more of different performance management program, including surveys, feedback, one-on-one, and of course, objective setting. Today, like I mentioned, I'm joined by Amy, and we really wanted to look at the state of work today, but also giving you a lot of tips on how do we manage internal conflict as well as external conflict. So the agenda today is very much looking at the state of work, addressing remote work and uncertainty. We're all in that spot right now. And also thinking about how do we look at the future of work, at least in the short term, where everyone will be more likely working from home or at least having some sort of hybrid model. And looking at how we can use one-on-ones and feedback to really be able to support employee well-being and internal relationship. From there, we'll look into identifying individuals struggling with remote working, and then navigating survey results to really provide a solution that you can bring internally in your organization right now, to be able to make sure that it's slowly becoming part of your culture, and also making sure, again, that we're putting employees' well-being at the forefront. The state of work today, I mean, I am obviously working from home, so as all of my coworkers, and very likely it's at least for us as an organization, although we're less than 50, we have called the shot in terms of not putting anything in place yet to go back into work. We are located in Canada, Vancouver, and I think we have been generally lucky in terms of how we have been addressing the pandemic. But of course, with a whole transition going to full-time remote working has definitely been a struggle. And I think at first when that happened, a lot of people talked about, oh, well, it's just tips on how to work remotely. But I think it's way more different than just remote work. We are remote working during a pandemic where your children are at home, your parents might be at home, you might have extended families living with you. So it's not the same as random remote working where at any point in time, if I wanted to go out, I could. I think we are very much going into a different environment where your private life, where you used to be able to leave your work, come home and enjoy your private life, is basically been mixed with work. And I think it's just going to keep going like that. And interesting enough, right before the pandemic, we were getting a lot of requests from people that we work with, our customers, in terms of elevating our managers. So making sure that our managers had the right tool to be able to properly support their team, in terms of managers understanding how to work on the soft skills, but also making sure that performance is where it needs to be. And I think with the pandemic and remote working, it's definitely making that training even harder in terms of how do I do a one-on-one where one of my colleagues might be just miles away, might be at home, might be having some personal issues, having any of these type of anxieties linked to pandemic. So what do we do from there? And I'm very curious, Amy, from your experience with your client, what have you been seeing in terms of the state of work?
So the biggest change that's occurred is that internal conflict, the challenges that workers are having managing their resilience, managing their stress loads, time management, all of the inner workings that maybe were working or just working in a workplace suddenly are starting to fall apart when they're having to manage both work and home in the same place. and their work productivity has gone down, and now it's become a concern.
And what do you see sort of like the short term in terms of resilience in general? I know like you brought that word up, like in your opinion, like how can that be described in terms of how do we measure resilience in
Yeah.
general?
So resilience is your ability to manage discomfort. How well are you able to take responsibility and take care of your feelings when things are difficult? That's essentially what resilience is, managing your own feelings and not asking somebody else to do it for you. How that shows up in the workplace is if there's a problem, do they take responsibility for the problem? Are they self-aware? Are they able to problem solve and manage themselves? And then the second way it shows up in is conflict. I'm uncomfortable. I can't deal with it. So I'm going to lash out at you and make you the problem. Yeah, so that's where we're seeing the big uptick.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And kind of, and I think why I was really interested in this topic in general, and I wanted to bring Ami along is very much how do we as HR professionals very much support our managers in identifying resilience level of employees. I mean, before that, again, without the pandemic, it was easy to go home and let everything go and then come back a little bit more fresh, whereas now your work is in your home. So we really wanted to look at a little bit of how do we have that shift to even start with. So I think the bigger shift very much, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the movement from a more traditional performance management to something more continuous performance management related, in terms of we are looking at having more regular conversation, right? So it's not the once a year performance review anymore. It's adding a lot of nuggets of conversation throughout the year, whether it's through one-on-one, whether it's through feedback, to be able to nip any sort of like problem right there in real time, be able to give feedback, whether it's positive reinforcement or anything that's room for improvement, in terms of letting an employees know that we're committed to them, in terms of we want to make sure that they are fulfilled at work, they're engaged at work, and they are also motivated with what they are doing here with us in terms of a company. So very often, one-on-ones, like we have just seen the general movement. I mean, 7Geese is very much about continuous performance management, and we have had a lot of customers going from that traditional mindset to something that might be a little bit more growth mindset related. So one-on-ones that is more around career and development, one-on-one more around what are you doing now and how can I help you be successful. And there is also that shift in the manager's mindset, in terms of, as a manager, from industrial era, it was all about, I'm going to manage your work, I'm going to manage your output, and if you're falling behind a certain benchmark, you're usually out. Whereas there is this very different transition now, where the manager, if you heard about the leadership style, is taking more like a servant leadership, right? So it is for me to be able to serve my team members in terms of making them the best that they can be. And I think a lot of managers struggle to get to that level, because you can learn to get there, but of course it takes practice. So we really want to tap into helping managers understand that there are two types of conflict, like Ami mentioned. There is the internal and the external. Of course, the internal, there's so much that you can do in terms of creating that self-awareness, but having Ami talk us through what are the different tips to be able to do in terms of recognizing the internal conflict. How do you go about having that type of difficult conversation? And then also more on an HR and culture perspective, what can we do to help? I mean, in terms of working with your client, like what have you seen in terms of identifying employees struggling?
Before I answer that, Wendy, can I just add on to a piece about the continuous performance management that might be helpful? And that is that continuous performance management is an incredible tool to help your employees learn regulation skills, it becomes a tool. We know in terms of research that learning online is best when you're doing consistent, continuous connections, but short. So short and consistent connection is far more effective than one big one and over the long period. So our brain, in terms of managing both learning and feelings, works best with small bits every day or small bits on a regular basis. So I just wanted to add that piece. So in terms of what we're talking about, I almost forget your question, but I have a couple of notes here. One is that we are anticipating more and more of the workforce working from home. And there's a whole pile of things you get when you work at work. You build community, and that's really, really important. You get eye gaze and human contact, and all of that has a positive effect on our nervous systems. And we get more and more practice with rehearsal, managing conflict, noticing the people around us, happy or sad. All of those small micro moments of learning teach our brain how to take care of ourselves and manage our internal conflict, which in turn is key at managing what's happening on the outside. Oh, and the stat is, in 1 year, by 2021, 30% of the workforce is going to be working full time or up to 3 days a week from home. So we're seeing an exponential growth in this trend, which was already taking place prior to COVID.
And Ami, to echo what you just mentioned, so here at Seven Geese, we regularly do surveys because we really want to get an understanding of where our employees are at, gauging in terms of a sentiment. And what you mentioned about, that social interaction, that community is absolutely what we found was one of the biggest impact of people working remotely and very much not being at 100%. So we use the Employee Genome Project, which is a set of questions that breaks down engagement into 5 different pillars, and one of them is around well-being. And we just launched the survey a couple of weeks ago, and that was one of the areas that we found that we had a lot of improvement to do. Is a lot of people mentions, like, sometimes when you're at work and you just going to the kitchen, for example, and you find that coworker, and to just be able to relax for 5 minutes to have that, chit chat, like, how are you doing? How was your weekend? Absolutely creates more of that positive feeling around being at work. Whereas I think a lot of people talked about, getting tired just from Zoom meetings, like getting an overload of Zoom, where you're just constantly sitting there and there's no break, right? There's no that, okay, I'm just going to stand up and go and tap my coworkers on the shoulder to have a quick chat. So I really appreciate you mentioning community, because that's definitely one thing that's missing. And I know a lot of HR professionals, even like myself, we are trying to do like more of that social team building and, having more connection between team members. But it's very different to what you were mentioning in terms of being able to have that social interaction to cut down the bigger piece of work into smaller chunks, and to be able to go back to the work a little bit more engaged.
Right. So I just want to give you another sort of fact that really guides what I do, and that is, in terms of evolutionary biology, our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that does all the thinking, the future, the thinking of others, the empathy, that all evolved when we did 3 things. We were moving, so we were walking, we moved, we worked as a collective, that's how we survived, and we ate fat and protein. So diet and movement and collective is how we survived. So we're hardwired to be predispositioned to those things. And we have become untethered to those things, and it affects our nervous system, which affects our mental health, which affects how we manage and work with others. So it's simple things that we need to bring back, and we need to do it in a very methodical, consistent kind of way so that we can train our brain to do what it knows how to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ami, from from talking to you and also sort of like what we're going to dive in next is like I think a lot of us like understand that there is a change, but I think the biggest thing is again around change management, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Is then as a manager, if I'm having sort of like let's say a team of 5, a team of 10, where do I even get where do I even start, right? Like I
Right.
mean, so like in terms of the next slides that we're going to see, we're going to make that available to all of you, so you'll get a copy of a template. But I really curious, I mean, in terms of you guiding us through the different sections, in terms of what are we as HR professional or just as managers, as team leads, as people leads, what are we looking into?
Right. So these are great questions in terms of that we can ask others and ourselves. This, I'm going to go to the next section here. We're going to start with the engagement levels. So engagement is about your ability to show up. How well are you able to show up? And if you are showing signs that you cannot give eye gaze, that you are blocking the video view of our faces, of your face, if you're spending more and more time away from others or disengaged, we could be looking, you could be looking at an employee who is struggling with depression, mental health, regulation, or resilience skills. And all of this is fixable in terms of creating different practice. The first step is to identify it, and then you can begin the process. And the idea, which I'll be bringing up in another slide, is to build consistent practices in your culture that support engagement and support the questions and support the awareness. That's our first step.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's engaged. Do you have any questions on that, Wendy, or?
No, I'm just very curious to look at all of the sections.
Yeah, okay, so that's section 1. Section 2 is your feelings. So our feelings are connected to our body, they're connected to moving, they're connected to play. We learned how to engage with other through unstructured, peer-to-peer, unsupervised play. We learned by moving, we learned by looking at others, and that system hasn't changed. So we have to get really good at knowing what we're feeling and knowing what we need to do about it. Section 2 are anxiety indicators. Anxiety is when you are fearful of usually something that's coming up. It's a worry that you are unable to manage. And it could be like you're in what I call a weak regulation, like it's a poor muscle and you need to train that muscle. And it can also be an example of something that happens when you overuse screen time. So if you're on a computer a lot, if you're gaming, that is really hard on your brain, and it sort of steals the work that your feelings need to work. So it's like taking away the workout equipment for your regular muscles when you are on a screen for a long period of time. And connected to that is physical activity. If you're not moving, you're dysregulated. If you're constantly inactive, you are harming your social emotional brain. And then the other piece there is just, again, because we're predisposed, because that's how we survived, is we need to be connected. We need to see people's faces. It helps manage our nervous system. So when we have less of this happening, we need to find ways to add back what's being taken away.
And Ami, I know you're going to talk a little bit more about benchmark, but for me as a manager, right? Let's say I send out this survey and I do identify some sort of anxiety, like how do I measure anxiety, right? Because I mean, everyone's anxiety level is different, and I think to what we both were talking about is how do I know there's a massive change compared to a smaller, like a more what I would say within reason type of anxiety
Right.
level, given that there's a huge change in everyone's life.
Right. So we are growing. We have a growing, I just want to use the word epidemic of anxiety. And a lot of this is about not having the practice, and not having the practice early on, and not having the practice on a regular basis. So many of the individuals in our workplace are anxious as a given. When we talk about baseline, that's why the questions have increase or decrease. Baseline refers to what is that individual's norm. So for example, if I drank 2 or 3 glasses of wine every day, I wouldn't do well, but I mean, that would be my norm, right? So that's my baseline. If I drank once a week and suddenly I was drinking 2 or 3 glasses a day, that's a problem. So baseline is identifying how was the person in their baseline in the regular day, and then what has changed, what's elevated. The one piece I want to say about anxiety is to say that baseline, our cultural baseline, is already high. We can all use work on managing our anxiety.
Absolutely. Okay. And I'm assuming kind of like going into section 3, the anxieties also get reflected into time management.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that piece, and that is that this section is really about the addicted brain. So when we're trying to compensate, say we're playing online video games, we are getting a natural ping of dopamine, which is our natural drug. Dopamine, like any drug, so oxytocin or heroin, they only work because we have that carrier already. So we already have a natural heroin in our own body. Heroin hijacks that internal system. So if we hijack our feeling, like our chemical system, to get us to feel better without doing the work of managing our feelings, we can run into some systemic and some physical issues, right? We become less and less able to manage problems. All problems look like big problems. We essentially become addicted to the chemical response that we get from that happens in our body. Do you want more? Because I mean, I could talk about this for hours, Wendy. That's my problem.
No, I think what you're saying absolutely makes sense. So in terms of time management, like how, like, again, I think all of these questions, again, we will make it available to all of you. I think what I'm very curious about is more towards, okay, after we ask all of these different questions, like what do we do next, right? So I mean, it first of all requires a lot for an employee to be able to answer these questions truthfully, right? Because kind of like reading through it, although I might not know necessarily what is being measured, So I wouldn't necessarily know it's about resilience or anxiety per se. There's a lot of questions where I think as an employee for myself, I might think twice in terms of,
Right,
should I say yes or should I say no? So
right.
how do you create sort of like that environment or that relationship maybe between a manager, a
Mhm,
team lead, and an employee in terms of, it's okay, like why are we doing this, like how do I
mhm.
help, like I'm not going to use this for your performance management, for example, but how do I get the right information? Because the other thing often with feedback that I'm sure a lot of you have encountered is a lot of people get survey fatigue, right? So
Mhm.
either it's once a year survey that has like 30 questions on like all type of things around people and culture, or you get people that tends to do surveys every other week. And people get tired often, and that has been the feedback we have received internally as well, is what are you doing with all of this feedback information, right? Like, of
Yeah,
course, the first time feedback comes out, you try to be as diligent, you want to help the organization. So you see a lot of feedback coming out of employees, but often I think where the ball is dropped is on whoever is initiating that feedback, right? To be able to say,
yeah,
yep, thank you for filling it out, but mic drop, I'm not going to react on it. So
yeah.
I think I'm curious to understand, especially around time management and work-life balance, is in terms of how do we then create that trust of, I need to understand where you're at so that I can help you. I'm
Mhm.
not trying to use this information against you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a much bigger question. And I also will deal with this in our next section in terms of what are the questions and what's the protocol to take. And certainly, again, we're in terms of that predisposition, it's always building relationship first. So the less I know the person, the more tentative I need to be, the more work I need to do. The more I see the person struggling, the more I have to build alignment. Because the idea is trying to get our employees to be their best self and to be
Mhm.
happy working in your workplace. And the first thing we need to do is build that alignment over and over again. And there's ways of doing that when the shit hits the fan, for want of a better word. So I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail later. But what is important is that you see that all of these pieces connect. And if I were to get a global survey with this information, that is, if it's private, I would see like what are the parts of this our culture that we need to amplify.
Mhm.
If people are struggling with, well, then it's going to come up again, but it's about making it public. It looks like we're all struggling with time management. Let us work with our community to build systems and hooks to help everyone learn that together. Right? You're going to see some pieces here that are going to be recurring themes. We see anxiety as a huge issue, not just with workplace, but like culture, home, children. Children are coming in with less and less of that, with less and less resilience, and that skill set is falling farther and farther behind, and it just moves up the ladder into university and then back into the workplace.
Mm.
So it's about building those pieces, building those hooks and supports, and making it public. To me, that would be number one.
And I think that's really interesting of you mentioning making it public. Like from our own experience at Southern Geese, and we talked about it in one of the blog posts I have written, is a lot of employees mentioned to us that they just wanted an acknowledgement of this is not normal. Because I think when, especially with a pandemic, but just having to work completely remotely, we we try to be like, you know what, this is how the way it's going to be. It's going to be short term. We'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. And we gotten feedback from our employees when they said, you know what, I would just like the leaders to be able to say, this is not normal. Like it is not, it, like we can't expect the same level of productivity from, you know, working from home and being in the office. And I think when we realized that as a leadership team and we made it public, where we acknowledge that, you know what, things will change. Some people will just be like, you know what, I can do this, I'm used to it, everything will be the same. It's just is an exception to the rule. Like most
Mhm.
people suddenly find themselves having to work at home, so not even having a workstation. I mean,
Mhm.
that's where it even started. And then now your spouse, your partner is working from home with you. So now you have a coworker at home, and then plus you have children, right? And I think to what you're saying, I mean, I think it was it was a relief for me as an HR professional to be able to see when we had that conversation in our town hall meeting coming from our CEO, to be able to say, we understand and we're here to support you. I think it really, to your point, created a stronger
Yeah.
alignment in terms of, yes, there is that normal alignment of you coming to work, we are paying you, and that's kind of like the psychological, a little bit of that work contract. But I think being able to make it public and to say everyone is having a hard time, like whether it's through resilience, anxiety level can be different for everyone, but we are all going through a tough time. I think making that acknowledgement was very powerful for us.
Mhm. And what we don't add, like the piece I want to add is what's hidden is it's all of those social, emotional parts that we get the lack. So that the social emotional brain guides the thinking, the intellectual, the prefrontal cortex. And if we are struggling to manage our nervous system, we can't work, and all of the hooks that we used to have to manage our nervous system in many cases are gone or severely weakened when we're working at home. And that is the piece that I believe needs to become much more public in our workplaces.
Mhm.
We need to actively support our employees at building up those skills.
And Ami, how do you deal with, so looking at, you know, section 5, and we're talking about internal relationship. So we're looking at, you know, identifying an increase in tension at home, or, you know, with colleague, or with friends. I mean, I can see some people having a reaction of, well, I'm not a counselor. Right? To
Mhm.
be able to say, okay, if my team members say yes, we are having tension at home, or yes, we are having, you know, issues with a significant connections, like what can I do about it?
Mhm.
And or even going that extra mile of, do I want to tap into the personal side?
Right. Well, and that's part of the new framework. What's personal is universal. Work life is home life is work life. Like that, those lines are being blurred. And I absolutely think one of the best things HR needs to do is also hold the boundary and say, hey, this is beyond my expertise, and move employees on into employee assistant programs where they're needed. However, collectively, all of us need lots of practice at
Mhm.
taking care of our feelings so that we can be productive. I know my brother, when at my wedding, said, you know, happy wife, happy life, and it's true for everybody. Happy employees make for a productive and healthy workplace. So we need to find ways to help give the regulation skills back to our employees and say, this is what you do. We acknowledge that this is hard and we're going to help you work through this. Here are the skills and the tools but we also expect that you work on this just as much as you're working on your regular employee tasks. You practicing and managing your nervous system is the new additional task that is part of the job description.
I think that's fantastic to kind of hear that, and we have seen that trend just in general in terms of starting to test resilience in our job description and in our recruitment process. I think especially like given that we are a startup where things changes a lot of
Mm-hmm.
time. I mean, it has been interesting because when we were talking to some of our employees that has been with us for more than three years, what we have found is it's a change fatigue, right? Because it's
Yeah,
all of a
yeah.
sudden you're not working at the office, you're working from home. Then you're having that insecurity in terms of, okay, can my company survive? Like, may I could I potentially be laid off? Could I be potentially be
Mm-hmm.
furloughed? There's a
Yeah.
lot of these anxieties that keep popping up, and I think a lot of people all of a sudden where could have had that resilience level when one things happen. I think we're dealing with resilience at a completely different level where
Yeah.
3 4 5 things is coming
Yeah.
at you.
Yeah. And we don't do well with that. Like our brains don't do well with that. Our brains don't do well with uncertainty. And yet our brains need uncertainty to grow and develop. So it's finding ways to manage both of those tensions.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's really interesting that you talk about it as a muscle, right? Like in terms
mhm.
of if it doesn't have any sort of challenge, the muscle stays the same or even weakens, right? But
Yeah,
having too much challenge on the other side definitely shock the body in terms
right.
of I don't even know how to react anymore. And I think that's a great metaphor to be able to talk to people about it in terms of thinking about it just like a normal muscle.
Hmm.
And in terms of, like, so we sort of like alluded to it a little bit, Ami,
Right.
and I sort of like want also to share a little bit of what Seven Geese has done because we have run through different surveys, very similar with the questions that you have talked about, and of course we have seen a range of people at different phases, right? Like where some people are just kind of like, yeah, you know what, work as normal. This is my new life now. I'm just going to be fine with it. And we have other people that's like, you know what, I'm sort of getting the groove. Might take me maybe a little bit more weeks to sort of like figure out schedules and things like that. And of course, we have a group of people that's just kind of like, I don't even know even where to start. So from a company level, the different things that we have done is, first of all, we have always acknowledged all of our feedback survey. And I think what you were talking about, making it public, has been very powerful for other people to understand that they are not alone to start with, but also for the rest of the company to also understand that, hey, not everyone is okay. And I think that has been really important in terms of, again, creating a little bit of that trust and connectivity in terms of with everyone across the organization. Our feedback has been anonymized, so you wouldn't know who in which department, who's that individual is. But I think it was very refreshing for people to be okay with struggling. I think that was one of the big thing, and also understanding that, hey, I can reach out to other people that are doing a little bit better in terms of looking at what are they doing that maybe I'm not doing that can be helpful. And I think that comes up to point number 3, which is set up accountability partners. We often do what we call like a random coffee. So we have a software that we use and it matches random people in the organization together for a
Mhm.
coffee. And we run it once every quarter, but we're running it once every month now to be able to almost force people to stop,
Mhm.
take that 1 hour, meet up with someone in the organization that maybe you don't even work closely with, but being able to talk through things, right? Either in anything such as, like, we have had people telling us that, oh, they had a chance to meet their family. Some people had a chance to sort of like showcase their workstation and what worked really well for them. And for us, it was just kind of like, oh, it almost feel like we are creating a fake interaction, like it's almost forced. But
Yeah.
sometimes that's the memo that we need to get, right? To be able to say, I need to take an hour off, I need to go and connect with somebody and make that effort. So that's definitely has helped. And in terms of provide the language and practice on healthy ways to manage conflict, I think transparency has been a big one, where we have allowed people to be able to talk through it, really encourage that conversation. I know a lot of the managers here at Seven Geese have also opened the floor for people to be able to truthfully mention where they're at, what they're struggling with, and their bandwidth in general. And that has been really, really helpful.
I'm going to add something to your pieces here with accountability partners. I love that you do the coffee. Like such a, it's high touch, low tech. Nice. So in terms of accountability partners, it's the questions. Like, so I have 3 questions to offer in terms of what an accountability quick check-in would be. It's, how are you feeling?
Mhm.
What are you working on today? And where are your points of friction? So how are you feeling is great, and you want the person to say something more specific, not just good, fine, but actually be clear about it, because we get practice at managing our feelings by identifying them. So to build that practice is a way of helping people regulate their own nervous system. What are you working on today? Keeps you in the here and now, keeps you focused, keeps you connected to somebody saying, hey, this is what I'm working on today. And it helps you center your work on what's important. What's the one important thing I gotta do? And then where are your points of friction? Helps you think about what's going to be, what are the hard parts about this, right? What's going to make this difficult? And again, just naming it and sharing it with somebody, helps you regulate or organize your brain, so it keeps you in your prefrontal cortex. And B, it calms your nervous system because you're telling somebody the hard part.
Mm.
So it's about keeping it simple. 3 questions, 10 minutes, that's it.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the one-on-one routine that a lot of our managers currently have. And it's exactly these 3 questions. But I think to your point is, we make those questions available to our employees beforehand so that they can really think about it. Because I know sometimes, really depending on the relationship between the manager and the team member, is you if you haven't been doing one-on-one, it might come across as, oh my god, this is an interrogation, why is the person asking me so many things?
Right.
So we have made it very conscious, especially we use Seven Geese internally for our one-on-one conversation, but being able to have a question in advance so that they can think about it, but also the ability for the employees to write in their notes first. I know a lot of people talking about meditation or journaling has really helped during any time of anxiety. And we really want to give the employees that opportunity, first of all, to be able to schedule some time in their calendar, to be able to know, okay, every Tuesday morning for 15 minutes, I'm going to have an actual conversation with my manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes my manager goes, oh, but we do daily stand up, like what's the different? And I think what you're saying is, it is different because it's creating that personal relationship and really coming from a place of being genuine, right? So it's not
Mm-hmm.
just a matter of, oh, how are you doing? Fine, okay, let's move on. And I think to your point, is very much pushing a little bit that uncomfortableness to be able to say, no, give me actual description.
Mhm.
Right? So don't tell me you're good, which what you might usually do in a daily stand-up, because you might not want to share everything with other team members in
Right.
the meeting room.
Right.
But being able to create that connection, I think that's really important. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's not something that we talked about before this webinar, but I'm very glad to hear that the current process that we have internally is
Yeah.
very much aligned with what you just
Yes,
mentioned.
absolutely. Okay, and so we just the quick thing about breaking up in smaller chunks is it helps your brain organize. Do one thing only, finish it, do the next thing. So the more overwhelmed you are, the more feelings or challenges you're facing, the smaller the chunks. So they might be 20-minute chunks, but chunking your work down is what will help you learn how to regulate and succeed.
That's an interesting tip. We have one of the teams where the manager has started to ask her team to time block, like
Right.
30-minute time block, an hour time block, and just to write what is the task that you're going to do. And I think
Yeah.
that has been really helpful, because at the end of the day, you feel like there's movement towards
Yeah.
your work. So I think
Yeah.
there's that positive reinforcement that goes in, but it also allows, I think, to what you were mentioning before, less of that overwhelming feeling of, oh my God, I have such a big thing to look
Mhm.
at. It's one of my coworkers always say, how do you eat an elephant? It's small chunk at a time. So I think it applies very much here. And I think the other thing to think about is, we talked about feedback. So in terms of how do we generate that conversation, right? Because it could be very awkward
Yeah.
to even just sit down and start asking, have you been having more sugar intake or anything like that? So we often seen that a feedback survey, whether you want to do it company wide or more specific on a team level, is a great starting point. I mean, some of your managers might be more comfortable with it than others. And I think right after this slide, Ami is going to talk a little bit more about tips for managers in terms of having that one-on-one conversation. But it also feels like after the survey is done, what do we do next, right? So you identified someone having issues, like struggling a little bit, and it's definitely where one-on-one will come in. And the interesting thing that, Ami, we have been talking about is a lot of resilience on employee side, but what about resilience on the manager side, right? So to be
Yeah.
able to properly have a conversation with someone that might be struggling, where do I even start in terms of my own self-awareness as a manager or as a team lead?
Yeah. And what I say about employees absolutely matters to managers. We, when you regulate you're regulating the people in the room. It's called stress contagion. So, Wendy, if you're stressed and we're hanging out, my nervous system will respond to you. It's what we do. And the higher you are with the more social capital you have, the more leadership or power you have in a building, the bigger the stress contagion. So if you're my boss and you're having a rough day, all of your employees are going to attune to your stress. You lower your stress, you manage you have already gone a ways into managing your department.
Mm.
So, number one, it's always, always about managing you first. And then, secondly, are we on? Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. Or is there something you want to add to that, Wendy?
No, let's go into the next slide.
If when you need to have the conversation, you don't need to be a counselor or a professional feeling person. You just need to be curious. You don't, and in fact, the worst thing you do is have the answers. You don't go in with the answers. You just go in with a state of curiosity. So, number one, find the right time means never talk to somebody when they're upset, when they're in a high state of arousal. Never you do it or if the other person. So wait when you guys are both resourced. You've had food, you've had water, you've had time. You know, don't do it in that moment. Your brain, your hearing goes, and you're in a fight or flight mode. So then when you get, so key number one, and it's huge. If you just find the right time, you've already gone a ways at building relationship and an opportunity for success. And then the second thing you do is, oh, what we've got, sorry, I'm just looking at this slide and the slide I have here. So find the right time. And then, okay, when you are talking, make sure that the goal when you do talk is to think about the end game. So the end game isn't to embarrass that person or make them feel as bad as you do. The end game is to build connection. The end game is to find a way that you guys can do this better the next time. So always have your end game. What do you want out of this? If your end game is venting, you're not ready, go home. You need to wait till you are clear about the objective you are looking for so that you can speak with a sense of clarity and kindness.
Mm.
Again, this might take some practice, but it's much easier than trying to sound like a counselor. Just say what you observe, you know, and that looks like, hey, Jeff, I noticed that you have been coming to the meetings late, that you're not turning your video on, and that's not like you. What's up? It's just like that. You are just giving the facts. You are just giving facts. So you're stating, this happened at the meeting. This is what I saw. This is what I heard. What's up? Or is that true? Or just state the facts and hold the silence. The more you can do this while you're regulated, while you're breathing and calm, the better and easier it will be for the other person to hear it. When you do this, you do two things. You're giving information, but you're also modeling to them and their nervous system what it means to do respectful conversations. Once you've stated the facts, let them talk and talk until they've stopped talking. And then just, if they go, like if there's a barrage of verbal diarrhea, just go, whoa, 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 that's a lot of information. I'm gonna break this down for you. I just wanna make sure I got this, you know, but all you're doing is stating facts, listening, and paraphrasing. You don't have, there's no magic there. It's just, the magic is in regulating yourself so that you can do this. And then to me, this word is great, because what you're doing is you are allowing the speaker to speak. The nuggets, the real reasons come out at the end. So they'll say, oh, you know, I don't feel like my input is being heard, and every time I say something, the team just talks as if I'm not there, and I put forth this really great idea and nobody listened, and then Dan said the exact same thing and everyone said it was a great idea, and I am sick of not feeling like I am a valued member, right? You tend to get those nuggets near the end. So what else? Just let them, and then, you know, are you sure I've got everything? Is there something here that is missing? I don't know what Jeff, remember that the purpose of me having this conversation is to find out how we can do this better the next time around. Right? Just if you let them know that you're playing the long game and this is what you're doing, this is how you do a one-on-one feedback of a difficult conversation.
I really appreciate you. It almost felt like an acknowledgement of we're not trying to be counselors. And I think often managers are uncomfortable with having those difficult conversation, and they try to stay at the surface, right? Of to what you were saying is, if Jeff goes, well, you know what, I have been giving my ideas, and I think a lot of time managers don't want to be in that uncomfortable state of asking what else, or getting to the point, so then they come up with a solution, right? To be able to
Right.
right there be like, okay, well, what do you want to do about it? Whereas, to your point, is as they go through their own explanation, it's not a matter of I said something and no one listened. At the end of the day, I just felt like I'm not a contributing part of a team. And I think often managers just don't want to get to that point because they don't know what's going to happen in between to kind of
Right.
get there. And I'm glad that you mentioned that it's important to set boundaries from the start, to be able to say, look, this is why we're having this conversation. And if things were to go a little bit outside of a boundary, as an organization, we offer, access to to professional
Absolutely.
counselors,
Yeah.
psychologists, or any sort of like employee assistant program that you might need. I think equipping managers with those type of information as well, give them a little bit more of that, okay, let's give it a try, let's see what
Hmm.
happened. Because I also know that even for me myself, when I was a new managers, it was just kind of like I came into the meeting being like, okay, I have these 5 solution for Jeff, right? I know what I'm
Hmm.
going to talk about. I know what I'm going to
Right.
observe and tell him what my facts are. And I already have that 5 solution. Where
Right.
I think, to your point, if we were just to listen to Jeff first half of the conversation, my 5 solution would have worked. But at the end of the day, that's not the problem. There's something deeper in it. So I absolutely appreciate you mentioning that as a manager, you're not being a counselor, and that managers just needs to hear that and know that it's okay if you don't have the answer, because the point of it is not for you to have an answer, it's for
Yeah.
them to be able to have their own answer, and for
That's
you to
right.
support them in terms of what they want to do.
Exactly. Exactly. You are not the delivery of the solution, and that's hard for us. And that's the new model. This new model is really an old model, but what we need to emphasize now is the practice, and we're playing the long game. This is not a quick fix, run, put a patch and move on. This is about putting the work in now, because later Jeff's going to be able to do this on his own. So you're putting the work in now, but you're training every time you're having these conversations. You are teaching others how to do this so that they can do it for themselves. And the awesome part about this is that it goes back home. So this kind of mindset teaches the employee to be a better employee, to be more productive and more happy, but it also teaches that employee how to carry it through at work, at home, which also will make your employee more happy. Because work life is home life is now work life.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest takeaway for me
Hmm.
is when it was easier, quote unquote, to be able to say, well, I'm not going to dive into the personal issues of that individual, where it's not really the case anymore, right? Like
Right.
where no, like, to you exactly what you said. So I think kind of like we want to end this conversation a little bit with the biggest takeaway. And I think one of the things that I appreciate you saying is just be curious.
Hmm.
And I think often managers, to what you were saying, want to come in with a solution in mind, and this is not it's not the goal of the conversation. It's
Right.
we just want to be curious and understand
Yep.
really like what is happening. But I think the other thing that I really appreciate from from our conversation, Ami, is how you distinguish internal conflict and external conflict. It's in terms
Mm.
of external conflict just doesn't happen, randomly.
Right.
Obviously, it comes from within. So I think the manage me first, manage others second is very important. But also, often I feel like managers are a little bit left out. So we talk about the leadership team, leadership skill, and then we go indirectly into employees. And I think sometimes managers are missing the love a little
Mhm.
bit to be able to say, hey, managers, it's also okay for you to not feel good.
Mhm.
But to what you were mentioning, it's, people look at you as a leader. So if you're not feeling well, you should have that self-awareness of, okay, let me just take a step back, just really evaluate where I am, regulate my own emotion before I go in front of others.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and I'm curious, I know the third point, I mean, in terms of the workplace culture need to embed resilience skills, like where do
Mhm.
you come from in terms of that perspective?
Well, I mean, this would be the big dream for Wendy. It's seeing cultures build self-reliant employees so that employees become accustomed and get the training and expertise to say, it's my job to take care of my feelings. And if we were to say to every employee, as part of your job description, we expect you to learn the skills to take care and manage your feelings. We're going to help you. We're going to train you. We're going to give you rehearsal and practice. And it's top down. Everyone follows the same protocol. That to me would be the goal, because then everyone has all the tools. It's embedded in the culture. It's public, and everyone's called on it. We're now building, we would be building efficient uh, cultures that are more able to pivot, that are more able to, with resilience, manage uncertainty. And when their own challenges happen, have a toolkit that will allow them to take care of that. So for me, that's the big, that would be my long game.
Yeah, and I think, being in practice, I can I can absolutely see more companies becoming aligned with having resilience being play a bigger part in terms of
Mhm.
hiring, but in terms of also development. I think a lot of companies focuses on training and development, and often they try to look at things that might be more about technical skills. Or you hear a lot of people talk about, okay, EQ, how to identify those. But I think to what you're
Mhm.
talking about is in terms of, we will probably see more and more courses around resilience, right? How do
Yeah.
you build your own resilience, but how do
Yeah.
you help others? I know
Yes.
we're running out of time. There is a quick poll that our wonderful May is going to send out right now. But just to give you guys a little bit more information, so Ami is holding another webinars. Ami, do you want to talk a little bit more about that one?
Well, basically, this webinar is on Wednesday, the 3rd of September. This is going to be in addition to what you've just heard. If you want to hear more information, more tips and tools on how to build this resilient inner conflict and outer conflict workplace community, then that's what the webinar is going to address. And I'm
Awesome.
hoping, yeah, and I will probably email you to give you a personal invite. So that's what it will be about.
Great. And we also have Libby Stewart, our Director of Customer Success, who'll be running debunking myth about performance management implementation. So I know a lot of people might be gearing up into looking at performance management, such as reviews, even things like one-on-ones and feedback. We'll have that webinar, I believe, August 20th, where you'll be able to learn a little bit more about that side. To close the webinar, I also wanted to talk a little bit about surveys. So you have mentioned, I have mentioned throughout the webinar that we use 7GIS internally. So we have been able to use surveys, and we will be sending you the copy of the questions that Amy has compiled to talk a little bit more about resilience, anxieties, and being able to identify the employees that are struggling. So with 7GIS in itself, we have been able to create that list of template and then being able to apply it to different groups across the company, and for managers to be able to dissect the information, but of course having that opportunity to sit with me and go through the results as well in terms of what do we do next. And again, just a nice way of using Amy's slide in terms of the different things that you can do to have a right type of conversation. Give that to each of the managers so that as they go into their one-on-one, they are more prepared, and it's just the friendly reminder of what your role is during that one-on-one, and just to be curious. I want to thank Amy. Thank you so much for your time spending with us going through conflict. This has been a pleasure. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Amy directly, or you can reach out to me. Our email address is right there. And we thank you very much for spending that 1 hour with us.